Tonight, we're going to call to order the City of Grand Terrace special meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the pledge to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So if you desire to speak tonight, please complete a request to speak form, and it's available at the entrance, and give it to our city clerk, and we will call upon you at the appropriate time. I'm going to ask our city clerk at this time for a roll call.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Hussey?
Present.
Councilmember Wilson?
I'm here.
Councilmember Mitchell?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Robles?
Present.
Mayor McNable?
Present.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We're going to start tonight with public comment, and for tonight, the opportunity for members of public to comment is for items only on our agenda for this evening. At a special meeting of City Council pursuant to California law, the City Council will only be taking public comments on items listed on the agenda. So if you would like to speak, now is the time to do it. If you've filled out a form and have yet to give it to the city clerk, please do so at this time. All right. I see no takers for public comment, so I'm going to close public comment, and we will move to B, which is discussion of emergency operations, and I will turn that to staff.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. For the record, G. Harold Duffy, City Manager for the City of Grand Terrace. So tonight, I'm going to quickly go over basically our status in terms of, are we ready for an emergency? And it's a quick slideshow. I do want to acknowledge there are some members in the audience here to assist with any questions and answers later on. We have San Bernardino County Fire, we have Battalion Chief Lassiter, we have San Bernardino County Office of Emergency Services, we have Michael Antonucci, who is the Emergency Services Manager for the county. We also have our Sheriff, San Bernardino County Sheriff Department, we have Lieutenant O'Brien, who's also here from the Sheriff's Department. Okay. So the goal tonight of tonight's meeting am I doing this or are you doing this?
Is there a way we can turn off the lights?
I'm sorry.
Yes, please. There it is.
Okay. Discuss City of Grand Terrace's readiness to address an emergency. Identify roles of staff. This is going to get old. Identify roles of first responders. Access and use of local resources and volunteers. And how incident commanders respond, first responders respond. So what everyone is concerned about, the number one question asked by city council members, are we prepared to respond to a disaster? And then who's responsible? The number one concern for city staff is the emergency operations plan. What is staff's role, the emergency response, and volunteer assistance to help first responders. So let's go back to the basics. So what is emergency management? It's a cycle focused on preparedness. Preparedness phase of the emergency is activities taken in advance of an emergency. The city has the responsibility in each phase. What is the city's responsibility? The concepts of the operation for emergency management is preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. Tonight's focus will be on preparedness and response. Preparedness, plan, training, exercising, public education, outreach, and inclusion of the community. So our emergency operations plan, is it up to date? Keep going, you're going to catch up. Sorry about that. One more. Is it up to date? No, but currently under review by the County Emergency Services. Note that the city's EOP is an extension of the state of California's emergency plan. Is it inclusive to all community members? Yes, it tries to tries to address the needs of all members of the community. Did the community assist in developing the plan? Yes, the City Emergency Operations Committee and staff used County of San Bernardino's template. Note, our municipal code calls for a disaster council under section 2.28.030, and our current Emergency Operation Committee is operating in that function. Okay, let's talk about training and exercise. Am I doing this or you? I'm sorry. Okay, I have control now. Thank you. Training and exercise. Officials and staff trained and exercise. So, exercised and trained in SIMS and NIMS. SIMS stands for the Standard Emergency Management System, and NIMS, the National Incident Management System. Do we have EOC training? Do we have regular exercises? Do we or the city members or members of the council and staff participate in the exercises? Are community partners involved or invited to participate in the exercises? Public education, more than a piece of literature on the counter. Is your city providing ongoing opportunities to residents and businesses? Are we doing more than just providing flyers? Yes, we are. Hopefully with our new partners and some of the conversations we've had in the community, and we'll have that discussion tonight, we'll be able to see and expand on that level of community participation. Working together before the disaster. Has your city built partnerships among all sectors of the community with FBOs, CBOs, American Red Cross and others, hospitals, private sector, businesses, school, high school education, volunteers, CERT groups? The CERT program, the city used to have a CERT program, and after our conversations with the Office of Emergency Services, we may be able to revive that program in the city. Maybe not to the same extent, but certainly to be able to activate for future use. So let's look at emergency management. Preparedness. Stabilizing, restoring, addressing initial damage, estimate emergency and public information. What is the response? So one of the first things the city would do is to activate the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. When do you activate an EOC? And there are certain levels of activation of an EOC. Level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1 is the initial activation of EOC. And that could consist of really basically the director, which would be the city manager in this case, monitoring the situation from the incident commander in the field. And once the city manager or the director of emergency operations activates the local EOC, automatically the county's EOC opens. And then based on that, the state's EOC opens. So as you see, there's a level of cooperation and support developed as soon as the city opens up its EOC. Now the level 2 of an EOC usually is based on after a major incident, you're either operating down or you're filling all the different components of the EOP plan, where you have your finance director in for resource recovery, you have community development in case you need to remove obstructions in the streets and sandbags and things of that particular nature. So in this particular case, what are our resources for the local EOC? And the EOC management, the city manager and department heads, and how can volunteers support the EOC? Now, the EOC can be, as I said before, just 1 or 2 staff members, or it can be a full-blown operation, depending on the size and the level of the operation. Here's a picture of what some of the city of LA, what their EOC looks like. So nowadays, it can be, as I said before, as little as a computer in a boardroom, supported by some volunteers and with all staff, or as large as a huge facility. One of the important components is that once the city opens up its EOC, as I said before, you have the support of the county and the state, and they'll be providing you with their resources to keep you up to date on the overall processes. So it's not significantly important that you have a particular building or structure in place as a permanent EOC, but based upon the level of your activation, that you have a plan in place if you need to ramp it up to the level 3, that you can certainly do that. What does the EOC do? It coordinates all activities, information and resources, looks at the big picture. So if there is an incident that's occurring in the field, there's an incident commander at that activity, and they're feeding the information back to the EOC, which then coordinates and determines how the information is put out to the rest of the public. Anytime the city activates EOC, or repeat this again, the county's EOC is always activated. When situations exceed the city's capacity, the county will assist and facilitate the additional state resources. Some of the things that the city staff can do, separate from our police and fire first responders, is to help stabilize incidents by life safety, property, environment. Also activate our CERT members, if we had any at this point in time. Hopefully we will in the future, to help us with field activities. And also contact all community partners. The plan also calls for us to include a list of community partners in terms of shelters and churches and activities that are available. But one of the things that we learned along the way is extremely important, because Grand Terrace is sort of a community built on volunteerism. But the Office of Emergency Services informed us that it is critical that if we set up shelters, that we use the Red Cross to set up shelters, because if the city were to activate a shelter, they would assume all responsibility and liability for those shelters. And so it's important. One of the things we want to do is make sure that any of the churches or the volunteers that we have that have shelter opportunities, that we funnel them to the right resource so they can be certified with the Red Cross and they can be activated that way, and it'll make sure that it shields us from liabilities, and also make sure that shelters are open in the right locations of an event. So the EOC also sets priorities and restore essential services. And also too is also help with the initial damage estimates that would be critical as if an issue was significant and we needed to come back and try and get reimbursement from the federal government. One of the important things is what information you put out to the public, what your residents and businesses need to know, what is being done for them, and where can they get what they need in order to operate or to sustain themselves. And one of the strong things that the city of Grand Terrace has is the AM 1640 radio. Also, we can do email blasts, Facebook, Channel 3. What's extremely important is that we make sure that even the point where the council members, before they comment on any issues, that they check in with the EOC, and that we have a consistent standard message to send out to all the give to the council members, so we can make sure that the same message and the accurate message is given out to the rest of the community. The bottom line, it isn't the responsibility of just one person, it is the responsibility of every person. It is making sure that every day we are as prepared as we can be through planning, training, and exercise. The other part about preparedness we'll talk about after response is we have some scenarios in terms of how our first responders would communicate with the command center once an activity occurs. So I think we're going to have Chief Lassiter come up and talk about the response for flood, in case of a flood in the city.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, Council members. Steve Lassiter, San Bernardino County Fire Department. So what we've been preparing for here, we've been having the discussion about how we in the field, our incident commanders, are going to interact with the EOC so that we can get information to you as you need to get information out to the public. So we came up with some scenarios that are going to allow us to just somewhat demonstrate what's necessary. So in the event of a flood, the system that we function within is the incident command system and the mutual aid system. We would then provide we would request all of the mutual aid resources to come in and help us, because as you're aware, we have one engine company that's here that would require the assistance of mutual aid from the surrounding communities to help mitigate whatever, and in this case, the flood that we make-believe scenario. So they would be there to help us to mitigate whatever's necessary. So as this response is going on, and we're calling resources in to take care of that, we would then start to feed information back to the EOC, your EOC, to let you know, and so you could start letting the public know. With that as well, we would also then have the ability to communicate this large-scale event to the county's EOC through a system called the Web EOC. I can log on to that if necessary out in the field from my command vehicle and give that information directly to the EOC as well. So between the two of us, we could then demonstrate to the public what's being done, the information they need to know to be safe. This would be the exact same scenario whenever we have discussions about a fire. But let's talk about the flood specifically. So in the event that we had a flood that would cause some major damage to the community, and again, very scenario-based here, is if it were to have enough rain, let's say, that would cause a mudslide. And let's say we had some homes that were destroyed or damaged in that regard. So we could then have our mutual aid system would come to help us for the immediate needs that need to get taken care of, life and property. At that point, we would then start to communicate with the EOC here in Grand Terrace about what are the needs for what we would consider the long-term recovery cycle for that. So we're going to start having suggestions like we would then have some discussions with Public Works on heavy equipment to start taking care of moving dirt and those kinds of things in order to get access into areas where you start helping people. And let's say, for example, if I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. So the emergency response would then go towards what the EOC would do whenever they start having to talk about finance, any proclamations that would need to happen in regards to getting financial assistance from either the state or the federal government. And that's when we would then work together with the EOC here in Grand Terrace and then have that discussion with the county's EOC. Same scenario if we had a large-scale fire that were to occur. All aspects of that would have the same function, same roles and responsibilities to move that on. We then went into to talk about, because it's fresh on everyone's mind, is the active shooter scenario. So at this point, I want to have Lieutenant O'Brien, he would come up and give his scenario.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Robert O'Brien from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. I was actually hoping to comment on the fire portion. I was hoping Chief Laster would take the active shooter part and fire reversal role. Just kidding. You know, it is fresh on everybody's mind, the December 2nd incident, and it's actually a very good example to discuss because it was so well publicized. Everybody saw what was going on. Everybody saw the reaction. Everybody knew pretty much what was going on. And I'll use that as an example, but we can very easily take that situation and move it anywhere in our local area. We can move it over to Loma Linda, where they have the university. We can move it over behind us to the high school. We can move it over to Colton, Riverside. We would have the same response no matter where it would be. The only difference in our response, if it happened somewhere here in Grand Terrace, would be the incorporation of the city's EOC. And that's where we would work with the city's EOC to use your resources and whatever you might have available, to lend to the situation. I'm going to talk a little bit operationally and a little bit about the EOC. So operationally, when you looked at it from TV, and I've went back and I've looked at some of the footage, it looks like complete chaos. And I won't lie, it actually kind of did look like complete chaos. But the goal in the whole chaotic situation is controlling the chaos. And that's what it truly was. It was controlled chaos. So from an operational standpoint, the shooting scene itself belonged to the city of San Bernardino. The city obviously tied up a lot of their resources with controlling that shooting scene, evacuating buildings, providing resources or deploying their resources immediately surrounding where the incident occurred. So it left the city of San Bernardino pretty much vacant. Our station, Sheriff Central Station, also had a response to the incident. It was an immediate mutual aid response, much like Chief Lassiter mentioned. So resources from Loma Linda, from Grand Terrace, from the county, from all over the area started converging on where the incident was occurring. Now, because of that, we're obviously not going to leave these cities, these areas unpatrolled or unmanned. Same thing with the city of San Bernardino. And that's where the sheriff began pulling resources from across the county, from the high desert, from Rancho Cucamonga, and they began filling in where those resources left. I believe the city of Grand Terrace had 3 or 4 units patrolling the town that day. Loma Linda had the same thing. We had about a couple dozen units patrolling the city of San Bernardino because the city was so tied up with that shooting scene. So it's a matter of controlling what's happening or what's controlling the result of the incident. So we're going to deploy our resources necessary. We're going to adjust accordingly. I like to think that we reacted much like the fire department does on a regular scene, because I like comparing myself to the fire department. Because they respond to an incident, and when they deplete their resources in one area, they begin shifting their resources to cover that area. And that's exactly what we were doing that day. Now, the incorporation of the EOC can only help us. And I can say that the city of San Bernardino did implement their Emergency Operations Center. They actually contract with the county for that. So it took some time for that to happen. But we had a quasi-emergency operations center at the scene of the incident. So if we needed streets blocked, we had contact with the city right then and there. We knew that we could get that resource, we could get them deployed immediately to take care of the necessary actions. Everybody knows the shooting scene that followed the incident on December 2nd. As the city was handling that scene relied on the came to rely on the sheriff's department. And it was that work that we had with the city to shift resources accordingly and take care of that incident. Now, that's all I have with the sheriff's department. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have regarding an active shooter scenario. I will make one last statement, though. The city manager opened up with the question, are we prepared for a disaster? And I believe the county fire department will agree that we are unequivocally ready for any type of disaster.
What type of coordination do you do with the utilities? So depending on the nature of the disaster, it might be important to work with Edison or the gas company or a water company.
Absolutely. Part of the incident command system in the field involves representatives from everybody who's involved. It could be public service agencies, it could be utility companies, it could be something as simple as neighborhood watch community leaders. So whatever those resources are that are affected, we like to include them in the incident command module, so if we need something done immediately, they can address those issues. We very often, in large-scale fires, brush fires, we will include Southern California Edison, the gas company, because if there is our power lines, transmission lines, a gas line that goes through there, we want their input, we want their advice as to whether or not something catastrophic could happen.
So what does that look like for us here in Grand Terrace? Actually, I think this predates both of you. We did have a flood of sorts when we had very heavy rains, and it blocked two of our entrances and exits to the city with mud and other debris. And so there were issues to deal with there. So if we went with any of those scenarios, how would that work with what we have in place today? What would the first step be if there was an issue?
Yeah, I'll let Chief Laster comment on that.
So in that particular scenario, one of the things that you get when you have a service from a county resource like the county fire department is that we have heavy equipment that we have at our disposal with our dozer programs. We also, in the event that it's something that our dozer can't necessarily handle, such as the landslides or something that's blocking roadways, we can then make contact through the EOC with here. We would then activate that. Then they would make resource recommendations through the county for contracts with service for some of the heavy equipment companies that could come in and take care of that sort of stuff. We would then make the contact with like the utilities companies, Southern California Edison, to make sure utilities are all shut down so that there's no chance for either injury or potential for fires if lines were to fall down, for example. So the coordination that happens with all of these agencies, both public and private, all mesh together through the actions from the EOC, both at the city level and at the county level. So does that clarify it for you here?
A little bit. Other
Okay.
council members have questions? Mayor Pro Tem?
The only thing that came to mind reading the booklet, the plan actually, when you were talking is there any circumstance where we don't have internet support and we have to alternate solely to the radio?
Well, with technology being like it is today, certainly I was in the military and I was a communications guy, and there was always redundant systems all the way back to even the ham radio. So certainly the military tries to use that same model, that if all of the current technology begins to fail for whatever possibility, then the systems can then fall back onto the ones that are trusted. And in this particular case, you do have ham radios. The county does have the ability through an emergency communication system to have those systems up and running. Specifically to internet, I don't know whether, because internet is a lot more localized, so internet may not necessarily through the local, such as the Time Warner cable, or if those are the ones, or any of the charter cables, if it were to hit, say for smartphones and such, they would hit the cell sites, you're probably going to have a little bit better access through those kinds of systems, because they tend to go out a little further than what's localized. So you would probably still have those accesses available to you. But it's kind of hard to say specifically whether we would or wouldn't here in Grand Terrace or not. But I think the systems themselves from multiple angles would still provide enough communication, enough ways for information to get to you.
Yeah, because just make a final point. It just occurred to me when they were saying Facebook and all these things, and I was thinking, well, what if those things hit a hiccup for a good while? I just would think like this. I never listened to the Grand Terrace radio until recently, out of curiosity, and it just seems something the city can maybe push that a little more, maybe have, when we're doing our exercises, make a rollout of that to being something that we have?
Just for example, the ham radio that we have set up at Fire Station 23 here in Grand Terrace has the ability, through our fire station, an emergency generator system. So should the power all go down, the station itself still has the ability to function, which then would still allow for the ham radio system to still be online and not be affected. The radio station itself, I'm not sure if it has an emergency generation system with it as well. If it does, then you have a system that's still in place there. When you talk about the public communication system, either through internet or cable through the television station, those may have more of a localized connection that may be affected by the emergency generation. Certainly the public themselves in their own homes are going to probably be affected unless they themselves have emergency generation systems in place. So,
Chief Lassiter was referring to the emergency operations side of it and the communications that we'll have available to us. But quite honestly, in a major disaster, I would expect the public to realize that there probably won't be any cell service. There probably won't be any phone service. Once a certain cell site gets about 20,000 cell phones attached to it, it begins going into a shutdown mode because it can't handle anymore. We found that in previous earthquakes, we couldn't get out on a cell phone, but you can get out on text. And that's something good to keep in the back of your mind because it uses such little data and such little cell service. Sometimes it's easier to get out on a text rather than a cell phone. So in any type of disaster, to include what happened on December 2nd, we had a significant slowdown in services that were available to the general public, namely cellular service that everybody has come to rely on. And just real quick, like going back to what the mayor's previous comment was regarding utility companies, we actually train with them quite often. We just this last year, I want to say it was in March of 2015, we did a large-scale disaster drill with Southern California Edison right here in Grand Terrace. They wanted to pose a situation, and they wanted to see how public safety would react to it, as well as their own staff. So it is a coordinated effort as far as trying to be ready for whatever situation might arise.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mayor, one of the things too, in the EOP, Emergency Operation Plan, Appendix 3 does list all of the different phone numbers for utilities and churches and the various activities that are there. So that's also very helpful. Was there a question about seismic activity, I think?
Councilmember Wilson.
Yeah, the one thing I'm looking at here, examples of activation of Emergency Operations Center and field operations, and I think the elephant in the room really is beyond flooding, which we look at the FEMA map, and the FEMA map, other than, a mudslide here and there, we got a lot of rock surrounding us up there. And a fire event, there's no doubt. We know what the San Bernardino Hills would have happened there. The active shooter thing, I think, is probably more terrifying than to everybody at this point. But seismic has got to be the biggest elephant in the room for us and the biggest interrupter of circulation situations, as well as interruption of service, as well as interruption of any kind of emergency capabilities other than what's localized in our 3 3/4 square mile situation. And so I was really, obviously we haven't had an opportunity to read through it necessarily, but I'm really, really interested in how we're going to address various seismic events and the damage that's going to be caused by that, so far as, water, sewer, all the rest of it. It's just going to be much larger than what either you two guys can do.
Certainly, Mike Antonucci, our Office of Emergency Services Director, he can address more of the larger scale things and maybe some of the coordination efforts that would take place. One of the things we really like to push is that when you talk about a large scale event like an earthquake, certainly there are going to be delays in getting systems back online. Most of the time, the ability to get emergency resources into a given area to address the very specific and emergent needs shouldn't be any problem when I start to look at how the community is laid out and where we could get resources from. Because we have the ability to initiate mutual aid systems from not only San Bernardino County, but from Riverside County as well. We have access to bring resources in from wherever they are. And those agreements are in place to do that very thing. But if you have more specific questions in regards to some of the ways the county may respond to those kinds of things, certainly Mr. Antonucci is here to answer those if you have some specific questions.
Terrific, I appreciate it. Madam Mayor, the one thing that kind of came to mind is I have in front of my house, I think it's a 106-inch high-pressure water main that runs from Silverwood down to Paris. And I've been asked probably over the last 34 years, many times, okay, so would that flood our house? Very funny. If it actually broke there, yeah, I think so. Be a giant hose. But I use the example of Palm Springs. North Palm Springs ended up with a leak. Somebody cracked into the top of the high-pressure Mulholland line. And all of a sudden, there was no place else to go. And then the water, by the time they shut down something like 10 miles worth of pipeline, it took a while. And the water basically flooded a whole area, which affects circulation and everything, and ability for fire to be able to respond. And I'm sure you guys have looked at that and tried to figure out how to go from there, where else you could grab from to be able to do things, and coordinating with maybe Riverside Highland and other locations and pumps. And
certainly, one of the major areas in the county that has a very similar kind of situation is the Cajon Pass, when you talk about the cutting off of resources from one area to the next. And there's been multiple times we've had training involved with those kinds of scenarios. So the same concept is taken into play whenever you talk about just resources being cut off from one area to the next. Like I said, with Riverside County, we have those agreements in place to where if resources from San Bernardino County can't get into there, Riverside County then steps in and starts to offer resources that are available that we can utilize. So absolutely, we have the ability to do that. Any other questions?
Not at this time, I don't think.
Okay.
They will come up, but I do have a question for Mr. Duffy. And that is, we have this nice, healthy plan in front of us, and what are the steps to implement this? I understand that Chief Lassiter and Lieutenant O'Brien and their agencies are practiced at this,
Right.
as are some of the utilities. Where are we as a city in implementing this plan and being practiced at putting it into place when need be?
Sure. So the next steps for the city, we use the county's template. Now we've completed the plan and we've submitted the plan to the Office of Emergency Services. And so they have a sort of a checklist of what the plan should include. And so they'll go through it and they'll comment on it and they'll let us know if we need to make any adjustments. Then once they say it's okay, they'll come back to the council and the council will need to adopt the plan. And it's really up to the city to do exercise and training for staff. And there's some online courses that the departments have to go through. But certainly it's recommended that the cities do some exercises, some mock exercises to ensure that they are prepared for the multiple and the various scenarios. And I think that we have a very active EOC committee that is serving the function of our municipal code's disaster council that can help us with those exercise scenarios. And as Mayor Pro Tem referenced, with utilizing things like the AM 1640 radio, doing scenarios on that, and looking at our different resources, and then the Chamber of Commerce, Healthy GT, they are very active and wanted to coordinate shelters. So all of that is a component of our plan that when we come back to the council after OES has given us the approval of the template that we put together, then we can certainly come up with a long-term strategy of whether it's an annual or semi-annual exercise component, whether it's a level 1 or level 3. But certainly, I think the most important thing for preparedness for us is that if it's a small-scale event, we will get resources from the county. But if it's a large-scale event where everyone's impacted, then our resources are going to be somewhat limited. So we have to prepare ourselves for support, and then sometimes for not that much support. But certainly, the more you practice, the more prepared you are with your plan, the better off you'll be in the end. So this will come back. I'm not sure exactly what the time frame is. Are we familiar with what the review time frame is?
About 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
They'll give us some feedback on it.
Okay. And so one of the things we can do, Mayor and Council, is we can incorporate maybe the fiscal component in next year's budget as part of the process to try and incorporate an exercise of some type as we move forward once the plan comes back to us and is approved.
Okay.
Okay?
Anything else for us tonight?
No, I did want to acknowledge the fact that the EOC committee that the city has been very active, and I want to be mindful to acknowledge their commitment to the city's overall plan. And it is with a subcommittee of the EOC that staff has been working on putting together the template. So they spent many hours, volunteer hours, helping put this together. And I wanted to acknowledge the committee for that effort. And we will continue to work with the committee. And I think once we clearly define the roles of where we are, then we can really put the resources in to come up with an outstanding overall plan.
And if there are other members of the community that want to participate on a volunteer level, what's the best way for them to get involved?
You know, I think through the EOC, and I had a meeting today with the county's emergency management system, and it looks like we will be able to get some resources to help sort of get our CERT going again. And really, that's the key, having trained people. We have ham operators, we have multiple people doing X, Y, and Z, getting them trained into the right place so when an activity happens, we're ready to cover all those activities. So I think certainly within the next 120 days, we should have activity available for clear sources for training and CERT.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments by council? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you who attended tonight. Thank you to our lieutenant and our chief. And we will adjourn this meeting. Our next regular city council meeting will be held Tuesday, February 23rd at 2016 at 6 p.m. Agenda item requests must be submitted in writing to our city clerk no later than 14 calendar days preceding that meeting. Again, I really appreciate the turnout tonight, and we are adjourned. Thank you.